Hi everyone! You are listening to Secret Art of Space-Time. I'm your host, Andy. I'm an astrologer and a writer. To learn more about me and my work, you can visit my website, mysticsandwich.com. I hope you enjoy the show. So I recorded the last episode about Aquarius and the age of Aquarius and Pluto in Aquarius a while ago in the fall of 2023. It's taken me a while to get this podcast off the ground. And now that we're here in 2024, now that Pluto is back in Aquarius, now that we're in Aquarius season, I wanted to come back to the theme of Aquarius and elaborate on some of the things I brought up in the last episode and add a few more themes to it. In part because this is a whole new energy we're in now, and things are changing so quickly. We are changing so quickly, right? If we're allowing the change, we are different from who we were a few weeks ago, a few months ago. Can you feel the rapid pace of change? It's exciting and can also feel like it's hard to find the ground we're on, or it can feel like the ground's moving beneath us. So it can also sometimes feel destabilizing or overwhelming. So I speak a lot about collective themes, right? How the astrology is related to what's unfolding on a collective level. And I find that helpful for getting a sense of, what's going on in the big picture. But it's also helpful, I think, to keep in mind the personal layer of the astrology, and that while, of course, there's going to be correlations to the collective layer, it also can be quite different, especially because often the big events that we hear about in the collective represent kind of the worst of the astrology, in part because the average of the collective is not necessarily conscious or intentional about these themes, but also because the news we receive tends to be the most dramatic and sometimes the most negative, even devastating things that occur, right? So it's like a biased selection of what's going on. So it's good to keep in mind that often what's happening in the collective is sort of like the worst of potential archetypal possibilities. Whereas on an individual level, especially if we're paying attention to astrology, we have the option to move through what's going on in a more intentional way. And particularly when we're talking about Pluto, right? Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto's all about bringing stuff up from the unconscious. So if we are willing to meet what's being shown to us, what's arising in our own lives, what's arising in our own minds, right? Aspects of ourselves that are surfacing from the unconscious, but also just in a day-to-day way, whatever's arising in our lives, right? If we're willing to meet that and engage with it and process and work through it, and if we're willing to change, then Pluto can, assist us in transformation and evolution. So it absolutely does not need to be a negative experience, although it may still be challenging, right? Life is sometimes challenging. That's not necessarily negative. So I just want to bring that kind of to the forefront as a reminder, as I go back into talking about some collective themes, that there's always the personal layer of it as well. And it's not usually as dramatic or as shocking as what might be unfolding in the collective. Now, of course, we're part of the collective, right? So obviously we're impacted by what's going on in the collective. And of course, some people are going through those big events, right? Obviously. But for those of us who aren't, we're still, of course, connected, right? And even if we're detached from it, like, we all are interconnected, right? And a part of that is simply that when big things take place collectively, we are going to feel it in some way. That said, there's also a theme around learning to parse what is ours to feel and process on an energetic level and what isn't. So a lot of us are learning this in one way or another, right? Especially those of us who see ourselves as, sensitive or empathic or intuitive or psychic or whatever words you want to use. We have the capacity or tendency to feel a lot, and sometimes that can be overwhelming. But sometimes it's overwhelming because what we're tapping into is not for us to process or to hold, right? Like, we literally can't hold it all, right? No one person can hold all the grief, all the pain, all the trauma, all the fear, all the stuff that's taking place on Earth, right? Like, one person can't hold all of that. And at the same time, of course, we are going to be impacted by what other people are going through because we're interconnected. So both those things are true. And this doesn't have to be complicated in terms of making that discernment of what is yours and what isn't. It can be as simple as just asking yourself, your intuition, is this mine? And then trusting the answer. Or setting the intention to release what's not yours, to come fully into your own energy. And there are many more practices, like energetic hygiene, clearing practices that are really helpful with this, that I don't want to share right now, but I might share more in the astrology circle if people are interested in that and want more specific practices and processes for working with that. But the point I want to make at the moment is simply how useful it can be to discern in the moment when you're feeling a lot, right? Is it actually yours? So in the astrology circle, the first one is February 24th. Everyone is welcome to come to the first one for free. There's information in the link in the description box. And in that circle, I'm going to take you through how to find what house in your astrology chart Pluto has just moved into, which will also be the same house as the new moon in Aquarius. So on a much smaller scale than Pluto in Aquarius, the current lunar cycle. And houses in astrology show us what area of our life a certain energy is activating. So is this energy most relevant to our work life or our health, etc.? And this can give us a much more personal understanding of how the astrology is impacting us. So we're going to go through that together in the circle. For today, I'm going to come back again to the collective level of what's taking place, but I just wanted to kind of remind us of the personal level and that it's going to be related but not the same as the collective level. So I'm going to speak for a moment to the quality of the energy of Aquarius. Aquarius is electric, and it operates in a nonlinear way, like a bolt of lightning, right? It's sudden, it's surprising, sometimes it's shocking or destabilizing, but it's not necessarily good or bad. It's this quality of sudden change, of non-linear movement. So some people find it confusing that Aquarius is an air sign, and yet it's also the water bearer. Why isn't it a water sign? But Aquarius isn't the water, it's the water bearer, right? So think of air as holding water in it, right? And the water in air allows for electricity to flow. So Aquarius relates to electric currents, to the energy body, to the nervous system, to lightning, right? Like literally and metaphorically. So like the way insight comes like the flash of lightning all at once, Aquarius relates to this aspect of our mind that is not linear, logical, mundane, but that can receive downloads, can receive insight all at once. All of a sudden, there's an idea. There's this ability to connect to something else, something outside of us. It's genius, really. And I know a lot of people don't like that word, which I understand because it's, tends to focus on like a few great men, basically. But if we think of genius as something that we all have access to, and it's unique for every one of us, but it's this way of operating that allows the mind to open up to something entirely else. It's not like this laborious thought process thinking through. It's a sudden flash, a sudden bolt of insight. And so in this way, Aquarius is related to innovation, creativity, genius. But what is the relationship between the group or collective, also an Aquarian theme, and the one who is innovating? In order to be that creative, in order to truly innovate, it requires first being willing to be and think differently, to be different from the group, to not conform. And very often, the group doesn't accept the innovator before they innovate. It's often only after they innovate and come up with some great idea that is well received that they are then accepted by the group. So there's this tension with how actually to be an innovator and the relationship with the group. So Aquarius has to do with our relationship to the group in many different capacities. So this includes conformity. It includes like trying to fit in, right? Trying to be accepted by the group and the particular pain that can bring. It relates also to the process of uncoupling from that, of no longer being willing to conform in order to fit in, of being ourselves, right? Authenticity, individuation, and the often painful process that comes along with that when the group we had conformed to no longer accepts us because we're not playing by the rules, right? We're being ourselves, we're being different. And then Aquarius also relates to the feeling of being excluded or actually being excluded, or in more extreme forms of being like excommunicated or banished or canceled, cut out from the group somehow. And then the solitude that might come for a period after that, which is also an Aquarian theme. Aquarius holds this paradox of the group, the network, of friendship, as well as independence, solitude, aloneness. And then if we follow this process further and in our solitude access our genius and embody it, so, being our beautiful, weird selves, and then finding connections, right? Making friends and friendship also is governed by Aquarius. So making those points of contact, those connections where there's a true resonance, where we're really seen, right, in our uniqueness, in our weirdness, and accepted and loved and held in that and for that. And then the community or group or network that can arise over time from those genuine friendships and connections, which is also Aquarius. That's the Aquarian ideal, right? The network, the community that sees us for who we are in our individuality and accepts us and values us for that, for our uniqueness. So all those different phases of relating to the group are included in Aquarian themes. And many of us are likely to encounter some or maybe all of those different phases over the next decades, really. Like, this isn't necessarily a very fast process. But with Pluto in Aquarius, for many of us, our networks are going to go through an upheaval and transformation and evolution, so that we can arrive at a place where we can truly be seen and held by our communities. That's the ideal, that's the potential. And so I want to take a moment to acknowledge and honor and celebrate friendship as sort of a key to navigate these times. There have been some really difficult moments in the last few years for me, as for everyone, right? And there have been moments where I felt a sort of deadness, like I don't really know how else to explain it, like I wasn't really living. And I didn't know why I was living or why I would go on living. Like, I know it sounds really dark, but I'm sure a lot of you can relate. Like, this hasn't been an easy time. And I have a history with depression, and I have a lot of tools for navigating it. And, I'm really grateful for, the support and the tools and the practices and the philosophies that allow me to find my way out of that place. So this isn't like a cry for help or anything like that. Like, I'm okay. But I'm bringing this up because I want to share that almost in every case where I dipped into that really dark place, it was friendship that brought me out of it. And that might sound almost trite or something, like, or just too obvious to even bring up, but it didn't feel like that in my experience. Like, in the moment, it was, just having a phone call even with someone in my life who I feel that genuine resonance with brought me into this deep feeling of interconnection and embodiment and being held and feeling safe and feeling seen and feeling in a way that was so different from that feeling of deadness, in a way that I really can't put into words. But it's like, just a phone call or just a little visit that would completely resolve that sense of, why am I even alive? And even in times when we're struggling when it comes to community, and I know a lot of us are, that, just one connection, one friend, one phone call can really be like a saving grace, So I want to bring that in as a sort of key for this period of time that we're in now for the next, 20 years. And we are, as I've been talking about, moving through a time of massive transformation, right? Which we all know, right? We don't need astrology to tell us that. But I think sometimes there's this temptation to think that's all over or almost over, right? And I want to find ways to talk about this that is real and grounded, but also gives us tools and supports and insight for how we can best move through this time and create something truly beautiful, because that is our work, I think. We're not just here to survive, right, or make it through. We're here to do things, to create what's coming next, right? This transformation, I think, can be seen as, it's almost like all the structures of modernity are collapsing. I think of the work of Vanessa Mercado de Oliveira, who wrote Hospicing Modernity. And I think this is a really helpful way to make sense of this time that we're living in, as not a time that requires of us to figure out how to solve the problems, right? And there can be this sort of anxious spiral of trying to figure out the solutions, and yet usually those solutions are still within the structures that themselves are collapsing, right? I also think of the work of Bayo Kamalafe, who talks about how so often our proposed solutions are actually part of the problem. And maybe what's really needed is a sort of reckoning with the fact of these old structures dying, collapsing, right? Maybe it takes first really sitting with that and grieving, right? Hospicing modernity, tending to the dying of these old systems without trying to fix it. And I actually think it's not just that these systems and structures are dying or even collapsing. It's like they're lashing out, right? It's like there's these like death throes of the worst, almost temper tantrums, but worse, right? Because they take the form of control and war and violence, ramping up even more, I think, because the structures themselves, the people that benefit from them, the like quote unquote powers that be, recognize that their time is up, and there's this kind of like desperate grabbing at power and control. And as we're in this transition where the energy is shifting and those old ways can no longer survive, there's an attempt by those who hold the most power to grab hold of the new energy and contort it and like create their own new power structures within it, if that makes sense. Like, it's like the old forms of power no longer can hold, but those who have held the power don't want to let it go. So there's this desperate clinging, but also new power structures emerging in this attempt to grab hold of new forms of power in the new systems and structures emerging. Now, I think along with this messy process of transition and in this Aquarian energy that relates to sudden change, to surprise, to sometimes shock or trauma, I think we might expect, without hopefully going into fear around it, I think we might expect there to be more big, surprising, shocking events unfolding. So I'm trying to find a way to share some of this without triggering fear, because fear isn't helpful. But I want us to try to be prepared, right? Because if we expect there to be shocking events, hopefully they won't be quite so shocking. Hopefully we can prepare ourselves, support ourselves, right? Gather our tools and our communities and really tend to ourselves, our nervous systems, our care, etc., so that if, when, big events take place in the collective, we can meet them with a little more grace than otherwise we might be able to. We're not at the part of the story where it all calms down, where, we get through it and then we're like back to normal. There's no back to normal, right? I think by now most of us have realized that, but there still may perhaps be a kind of longing for some new state, right? Some new normal, some new stability. But this isn't a moment of stability. This is a moment of change and transformation and flux. And it relates to every aspect of life, from our beliefs what we take to be reality, even, to like scientific paradigms, to governance structures, to how power operates, to how war is waged, to how we live our lives, to what kinds of jobs are available, to how money works. Like every aspect of our lives is changing. And we're getting better at it, right? We've been through several years of flux. I do think that resources in the form of practices, tools, supports are key. And it doesn't always have to be like hours of some spiritual practice. It could just be 10 minutes of sitting under a tree, or calling a friend, or reading poetry, right? Anything that brings you into the present, into your body, that connects us with Earth, with each other. Simple things. And as all of these big events take place around us, which of course we have to some extent, in some way, depending on who we are and what the event is, right? We have to engage with it in some way. But I think it's so key to also remember that we're here to create, not just to react to what's taking place on a collective level, but to the extent we can, find the eye of the storm and be agents of change, not just react to the change that's happening around us. And yes, this might be with specific projects in big ways, creating new communities, innovating, and all of that, but it also can be creating change in very simple ways by being differently. Right? By facing our lives, engaging with what's arising, and being willing to change, to evolve. And through that evolution in this, personal way, embodying something different, and therefore creating something different that ripples out into the collective and has impact. So I do just want to mention, when, talking about big, sometimes shocking events, I have seen a couple people talking about nuclear war, and I want to just share, for what it's worth, from my own limited perspective, I really don't see that. Just in a totally intuitive way, I don't think it's going to come to that. I don't think what we're facing is a potential complete destruction of all of humanity and Earth. I don't think that's the kind of apocalypse we're in. Like, aren't all the many apocalypses that are already taking place enough? Like, there are some truly horrendous things unfolding, as you well know. And I think our work in part is, how do we meet that without falling into hatred, violence, revenge, fear, to the extent we can. To the extent we can, and obviously, it's different for people in different situations with different capacities, right? But like, to the extent we can, how much can we move through these times with humility, with love, with generosity, with, even in moments, maybe joy, appreciation, gratitude, so that what we create, what we are creating, is created of that. and not of fear, greed, hatred, violence, etc., which just creates more of that, right? Okay, so I mentioned weirdness as an Aquarian theme, right? Aquarius relates to difference, uniqueness, weirdness, strangeness, anomalies. And we can expect that. We can expect more anomalies. We can expect to be surprised. And one theme that I forgot to mention in my first Aquarian recording, which is very much a Pluto and Aquarius theme, is aliens. And it's so funny because there's so much resistance around this topic, even though there's government officials, military officials talking about it. There's been reports in mainstream media, like the New York Times, and still so many people won't even broach it as real or potential or as possible, right? It's too weird. And this is a specific theme that we can expect to hear more about, but also in general, this experience of encountering things that are so weird that a lot of people won't even be willing to acknowledge it, even when there's evidence, even when it's out in the open. And of course, aliens, it's not all out in the open. And I think it should be obvious that the military and the government are going to want to control the narrative around this. So we should be very wary of what is reported through official channels. Just as we should be wary of, any reports on these topics, basically. But that doesn't mean there isn't something to it. So this is also part of the vying for power, is vying for control of the narrative and what is considered real. That's how deep this power struggle goes. It's around reality itself. So for my intuitive 2 cents on this, aliens are real. But it is tied to interdimensionality and to consciousness. So it's not just as straightforward as beings from, other star systems traveling here in 3D ships. I think it's actually much weirder than that and gets to this sort of deeper topic around, again, what is reality itself and how reality is connected to our consciousness of it, and how reality is multidimensional, not a simple 3D material world, right? So I think there's an important connection there between interdimensionality and aliens. I think there's often a temptation to want to decide in advance, is this good or bad? Are they good or bad? But just like there are many humans on Earth with different intentions, there are probably many beings out there with different intentions. Some of them probably, have our best interests at heart, and some of them may not. So I think it's overly simplistic to be oh, the aliens are coming and they're going to kill us all or whatever, or they're coming and they're going to rescue us. Both of those extremes are unhelpful. I think really the challenge is, how open-minded can we be right now? Are we able to loosen our hold on what we may have assume to be or believe to be true for perhaps our whole lives, perhaps for generations. And we're also in this period of Saturn in Pisces, which goes from more or less 2023 until more or less 2026. And I call this period the age of deception. And obviously there's a lot more to it, but Saturn is the planet of reality, of the 3D, of structure and form, and Pisces is the sign of the ephemeral, of the spiritual, the multidimensional, of dissolution, of fantasy, of dream, of delusion. So one theme that's correlated with this is the dissolution of structures. There's also a lot of distortion, manipulation, deception, right? It's very hard to discern what is true. There's so much censorship. There's so much misinformation. There's so much control and manipulation of narratives and information. Maybe the best we can do is work to let go of the need for certainty or control or even truth. Or when it comes to truth, it's like the most solid thing is the spiritual realm, right? Saturn, reality and structure. In Pisces, spirituality and magic, that's actually the most solid thing right now. Saturn in Pisces also correlates to grief. Grief as something we may have to move through in order to create what comes next. Maybe before creating, we have to first be with what is dying, right? Before what is new, we have to be with the end of what is old, right? The death comes first. So I want to come back to this theme around the transformation of our networks and communities, and to see this as part of the process also of creating what's next, as requiring new connections, new contacts, new relationships. So there's sort of this mass and slow, right, over decades process of like all humans sort of shifting in relation to their contacts and networks, in order that we can be better positioned for doing our part, right? For playing our role in whatever is emerging through us. So this is maybe like a spiritual reason for this transformation. Okay, so that covers sort of the few themes that I wanted to add on to what I spoke to last week. If you want to dig into the more personal layer of this, of how Pluto in Aquarius, and as well as on a more small scale, this lunar cycle in Aquarius is impacting you, please do come to my astrology circle. The first one's February 24th. I'm going to show you how you can track these things in your natal chart. So even if you don't know any astrology, I'll show you how you can do this. So we're going to work together to track these themes on a more personal layer. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Till next time. Okay, bye. You can support the show by leaving a 5-star review, and for as little as $4 a month by clicking the link in the description box.